call it altered state of consciousness, call it the timeless state of being. We midwives used to call it going to the moon. To let go completely into this other state of consciousness. Birth is an amazing mystery. It's a rite of passage. It's a spiritual thing. It's a sacred thing. So what can we do to bring the sacred back to birth? My name is Janet, and I'm here at my home in the hill country of Texas. And my friends are here with me to help me tell a story that I really think needs to be told for my sisters, for the women out there who are mothers or about to be mothers, for their daughters, and for women of the world perhaps. I had the opportunity, a rare opportunity, to serve for many years as a midwife. And during that time, I realized how special it was to get to see birth in its truly natural form. So I was doing births in a birth center up in Dallas. I was doing births in people's homes. And I too had given birth to 2 of my children at home. And eventually I moved my practice down here to the hill country and continued to attend births. And seeing birth as it truly is. Así es el parto. This is birth. But unfortunately, in our society, we seem to have added a lot of constraints to the birth process. I know that it's been well-intentioned. I know that we have done this in the name of safety and making birth a safer process for mothers and babies. But in my opinion, that has backfired. And I want to explain to you why that might be so. You see, I've come to understand what the natural process of birth is and how easy it is to interfere with it. So I'd just like to take a little time to share some of my insights about birth with you. And I think that if you understand birth as I've come to understand it, it will inform your choices. And if you're a caregiver or a birth attendant, it might inform the way that you are with women who are giving birth. My own contribution to this began when I was an apprentice midwife, and later midwife with my own practice doing home birth. And there were some births that were very fast and just proceeded straight to conclusion, a happy conclusion, a nursing baby and a happy mother in a short period of time, 6 to 8 hours, you know. And there were other births that took a lot longer, 24 hours, even 36 hours. And I would ask myself, you know, what's the difference between those two types of birth? And we were honoring the natural process, but still sometimes birth just did not progress as we would have liked it to progress. And it wasn't necessarily any kind of complication. Yes, there was the occasional malpresentation, one baby that was born with a brow and her elbow up. Took a lot longer to birth than other births. But there was something going on, so I started observing mothers who were giving birth. And I was thinking, now what's this mother doing who's having this short, fast birth? And what's this other mother doing or not doing that's having the long, extended birth? And so I started observing that women had different strategies for handling their labors without medication. And the the strategies were as different as the women themselves. So one example was a group of Christian Scientist women that birthed with us. And they, when they would go into labor, they would call their practitioner, and the practitioner would do long-distance prayer. And one of the fastest and easiest births I saw was a mother who, I was there as an apprentice midwife. I was supposed to call my chief midwife and get her there in time for the birth. And this mother was just going about her business, doing her household chores, and not even stopping for contractions. And I thought, she couldn't be that far advanced. Her practitioner was praying for her. And then I decided, well, perhaps we should check and see where she's at. And I did a vaginal exam, and she was 7 centimeters dilated. And usually when a woman is 7 centimeters dilated, she's not happily going around and doing household chores. So I called Barbara and said, Barbara, you've got to get here right away. And Barbara only got there moments before the baby was born. And it was, the mother dropped to her hands and knees, and a couple of pushes, and the baby was out. Another woman from a completely different religious tradition was a charismatic Christian. And she had had a couple of very difficult births. And she tended to have big babies. And so I got to know her during the prenatal period. One of the advantages of being a midwife is you see someone from start to finish, if you will. They come for prenatal visits, you're present at their birth for the entire birth, and then you do postpartum care for 6 weeks. So you get to know families, you get to know women. And I learned in the process of getting to know this family that this woman was, from a young age, had been speaking in tongues, and as part of her religious tradition. And I just had an intuition for some that I'll explain later. I'd started to glimpse what was going on with the women that had the easy births, and I just had a feeling to prompt her during the birth to go into that state of consciousness where she would speak in tongues. She was stuck at about 4 centimeters and wasn't progressing when I made the suggestion during the birth. And she dropped in very easily to that prayerful state where she would begin to speak in tongues. She began to speak in tongues. And within a very short period of time, 10, 15, 20 minutes, we had a 9.5-pound baby. Just pretty much, the rest of the labor completed itself in record time, and we had the baby there. So there were on the other side of the equation, there was the young first-time mother who showed up at the birth center with her whole family in tow, and everyone kind of camped out in the birth center, and she was in the birthing room, but family members were coming in and out, and she just was not progressing. And finally, the family kind of got tired of being there and started dropping away. And in that space where she was more or less quiet and only a few people around her who were involved in the birth, she finally started progressing and had her baby. So, different, and other women that were professional women would show up with all sorts of props because they have their fears of birth. They would have birthing tubs, and they would have, their favorite pillow, and they would have this special music and all this. But you could tell that their level of fear was very high. They were showing signs of being very fearful. And so in that case, it seemed like someone trying to figure out birth. All of this was my question is, of course, I was a mother with small children at the time as well, and being on a 36-hour birth was really hard on my family. So I wanted to figure out what was going on. What did these strategies that worked all have in common, and what did the ones that didn't work all have in common? And it ties in with the earlier information about the brain as a gland. But alongside of this, my own spiritual path started to open up. And when people ask me, well, why at that particular time, I say, you only have to look in the eyes of a newborn to realize that there are mysteries about birth that we don't understand. These were little wise beings looking back at you that looked like they had, they knew the secrets, and that look that they would have when they were first born would disappear, and they would then be babies. But during that sensitive period after the birth, you would see that. And so around that same time, I was a new midwife. My spiritual path was also opening up. I decided I wanted to learn how to meditate. Well, I tried a lot of things to make my mind slow down and to go into a meditative state. And I had a lot of brain chatter. And it would take me probably all the time I had to devote to meditation just to almost get to the point where my mind was quiet enough. So I talked to a friend of mine about it, and she said, oh, I've got these tapes. Try these out. It'll help you quiet your mind. And they come from the Monroe Institute. They're called HemiSync tapes. I went, okay, I'll give it a try. And so I tried out this tape. And about an hour later, it was as if I came to from having been under anesthesia. And I went, whoa, what just happened here? And I was kind of freaked out by it. And so I called my friend and I said, Sharon, the oddest thing, I just played the first Monroe tape, and it's like I don't remember anything at all for about an hour. The last thing I heard on the tape was like counting me down or something, and then I came to as a feeling of coming out of anesthesia. She said, don't worry about it, it's called clicking out. It's when you go into an altered state of consciousness and you haven't necessarily been there before, your brain is not familiar with what that's like, and it takes a while to get used to going there. So I went, well, okay, I guess this is working. Anyway, long story short, I started thinking about the similarity between that state that I had experienced in meditation and the state that the mother in prayer was in, or the mother who spoke in tongues, which is another form of prayer. And now we're moving sort of into the sacred realm, because what we call that experience when we go into that timeless state of being may have many names based on your own religious or spiritual tradition. But I had this idea that could be used to help women give birth. And so call it altered state of consciousness, call it the timeless state of being. We midwives used to call it going to the moon. And it was an observable phenomenon in a birthing mother. She was there, she was present, she was breathing through her contractions, she could ask for a drink of water if she wanted it. But she was like in another world. And we always prized that we could recognize that was going on and know that the labor was going well. But it wasn't until I ran into the Monroe Institute and the HemiSync tapes that I found out that there are actual brainwave frequencies associated with these different states, and that you can call them altered states of consciousness. Then later, with my yoga tradition, they could be called the timeless state of being. There was a doctor who did research on stress who called it the relaxation response. There are people who call it the runner's high. There are many names for this, and I even found an anthropologist by the name of Felicitas Goodman who said that going into altered states of consciousness is a basic human need. So even we're all familiar with one altered state of consciousness that we do all the time, and that is going to sleep, right? So there are, apparently now with research, we've learned that when you're asleep, there are even further differences in brain waves that occur. You go into an alpha state, you go into a beta state, maybe a deep delta or a theta state. And so these are some of these are actual scientifically verifiable states of consciousness. And so I call that the sacred in my book, because we very quickly we run into religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs that we want to honor in people who are giving birth. We don't want them to necessarily use Monroe tapes, though that can help as training wheels to know how to go there. But we want them to figure out in their own spiritual traditions what to do to help them get in that space. So I made a call to the Monroe Institute, and I said, you know, I'm a midwife out in the Texas Hill Country, and I have been trying out your tapes, and I think that they could be used to help women give birth, or at least get them over their fear of what we might call, you know, a sense of dying. You know, when a woman gets into transition, often she'll say, this is killing me, I can't do this, I'm dying, you know. But we know from her tone of voice that actually the birth is imminent. You know, it's very different than when you hear a mother saying, something's wrong, take me to the hospital now. It's different. It's like, this is too much, I'm dying, you know. But it may also be that she just has no frame of reference for what it's like to go there, you know, to let go completely into this other state of consciousness. So I wanted to provide these tapes so that women could become comfortable before their births with going into an altered state. And along the way, we made some really interesting discoveries in trying to apply this. One is that when you're in an altered state, you have a different experience of pain. So if you learn how to let go at that level and you go to the moon, you go into the timeless state of being, you go into the sacred realm, if you will, pain I won't say it's not intense, but it changes. Your perception of it changes. And we can even learn how to control our pain signals by practicing with implanting in our subconscious the idea that we can turn down our pain signals. So, and then if you start thinking about it, while we're in the sacred realm, what are we doing treating birth in such a materialistic way in our society? What are we doing? Because we are spiritual beings inhabiting material bodies, you know, and yet we're putting so much emphasis on the material. But birth is an amazing mystery. It's a rite of passage. It's a spiritual thing. It's a sacred thing. So what can we do to bring the sacred back to birth?